Hello viewers, my name is Adam.
I'm Aaron.
This is Seeking Me Productions. Bring you another TV review.
So, we had Game of Thrones, and now we have the prequel, House of the Dragon. Everybody knows how they feel about the ending of the first series of Game of Thrones. It started out strong. We were all geared up. It was appointment television. We needed to know what was going to happen next. But somewhere down the line, the story development got worse and worse. Mostly having to deal with the fact that the series of books that the actual television series was based off of
ran out of material.
Exactly, ran out of material.
But House of Dragon, just to say little without saying a lot, had a lot to bring. It had a lot to do to bring up the credibility of that brand.
And I'm surprised and happy to say that it definitely brought back appointment television.
Mm-hmm. So, House of the Dragon has been developed by new showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik. Miguel, he was also a reoccurring director of the original series, directing a lot of the bigger episodes.
See, where Game of Thrones was a story about multiple houses and different family lines competing for a particular prize, which would have been the control of the entire realms on the seat of the Iron Throne, this particular series centers itself on really just one or two families in this particular run, specifically the Targaryen dynasty, and those families that are connected directly towards that bloodline.
Yes. Unlike the Game of Thrones, which was being based off of a series of books, House of Dragon is taking most of its content from the history within a history book called Fire and Blood that George R.R. Martin also written. That's basically the blueprint of which this series will be focusing on.
But it's also centered on a specific event that happened towards the predecessor that ended up becoming the groundworks that would eventually become the Game of Thrones series. Specifically, in this particular sense, the historical event of a known war known as the Dance of the Dragons, which was a civil war between the Targaryen bloodline itself.
Mm-hmm. And this whole first season is basically a prologue to the events that will take place, what they're hoping is at least a 3 to 4 seasons. So story structure is slightly different than what Game of Thrones. Sure that you still have some multiple character perspectives, but most of the multiple character perspectives are from either they're working on the same plane.
Yeah.
And what's different as far as story structure than what House of the Dragon does than Game of Thrones is that because it has to tell like a long spanning story, it does do time jumps to get to the points of particular events.
This series definitely with the time jumps itself, on one hand, it could be a little jarring in certain respects, considering that for certain characters are swapped out immediately depending on where we are in the storyline.
Swapped out as in actors,
exactly,
most of the time.
Specifically for specific time jumps within the series, while other actors actually stay in, and it doesn't really change so much for them. So far as you might see a few instances of them getting a little older, but for the most part, it's that same character and that same actor playing them.
And with the time jumps between every every episode, and then the later half of the season is some major time jumps. It makes for each episode as if their own segmented story.
Exactly.
So in some ways, it can be in a very limited anthology-like sense, depending on the event that they're telling in that particular episode.
But before we get into that context, let's go ahead and set the scene for where this particular story point jumps off from. Again, this is a storyline that's completely centered and focused on the Targaryen dynasty. It's following the events of King Jaehaerys, who was the king way in the back, ends up having a dilemma. He's dying, and he has to figure out where his line of succession is going to fall. Now he has a couple of choices. He has his own nephew, and he has a son, and then he also has a daughter. Is specifically he has actually two sons, and he has a daughter, and he figures he has to try and figure out what will be the best line of ascent that wouldn't throw the kingdom into array. And he ends up choosing his one of his sons by the name of Viserys to inherit the throne. Now, from that point on, the storyline follows Viserys and his line, and a few of the other characters that comes from other families that centers around them, and we see the dominoes start to fall.
Mm-hmm. And the story basically picks up from its inciting moment when come a time where King Viserys, after only having one child for the longest, a girl by the name of Rhaenyra.
From the countless attempts he ended up having trying to have a male successor, but failed with unfortunate multiple counts of miscarriages with his wife. Eventually dies due to the childbirth.
He anoints our heir, the possible heir to his daughter Rhaenyra, and thus the story unfolds. Characters going forward. From the actions of which you'll see, at least in the first episode, and a couple of episodes going forward, King Viserys, who's played by Patty Cassadine, might come up as aloof or naive. And some form ways that he is.
Very much is. I mean, especially if you try to figure out the concept that you have all these outside obstacles, trying to figure out whether or not his decision was the best decision. And for a lot of the individuals, especially within his realm itself, are not necessarily open to the fact of having a female heiress.
You see that he's actually feeling so much of the weight that's thrust upon him staying on the throne.
So much so that it is also affecting him on a physical matter as well. You really do see this character deteriorate both from a mental and physical sense of having to uphold this excruciating weight of family, blood, and duty.
And Patty Cassadine, from his run on the show from season 1, displays a masterclass of what on-screen acting can do.
If this man does not get a nomination, and let alone win his nomination,
he should be the top performer from any type of awards going forward.
It'll be a darn crying shame if he doesn't get it.
His brother Damon, who is like you'll see at first, he's like almost like, oh, you're going to need to watch out for this person because he's probably going to be is going to try to throw some wrenches and possibly be a possible antagonist.
But no, he plays this particular character is so well complex and complicated, and is so done deliciously so.
Some of the best moments of acting that goes on par with what Patty Cassadine does. Matt Smith will have full-on sequences of non-verbal performances that is captivating. And not to say that the real two main characters of the show don't pull any slash wall. And those are Alicent and Rhaenyra.
Now, with the character of Rhaenyra, this definitely could have been a role that could have been thrown away, or could have just
or a copycat role
that could have just been a place marker for everybody's fan favorite from the original series, Daenerys Targaryen. But no, Rhaenyra Targaryen is very much her own woman, and very much a powerful player within the series itself.
Now, when we discuss how the series did a lot of time skips, Rhaenyra is one of those characters who we see start off young and who ages with them as the show progresses. The first actress, she does a well job of portraying the more hot spitfire, that youthful energy, that she has a lot more aspirations and independence that she strives for, because she doesn't want, she understands that she wants a throne, and then once the opportunity of her is actually put upon her, now she's coming to realize
the full gravity of what that throne actually means and what it takes in order to claim it.
and the way that, like, on one hand, she still does a lot of things herself.
Exactly. She does that. She continues to be an individual that wants to play the rules by their own terms.
In a lot of ways, a lot of her actions that she does in the show is very progressive for not only the times, but also very it mirrors a lot of the activities that's going on in modern today. So, but unfortunately enough, she's too progressive for her own good. But when she grows older, you see that she is more reserved, and she's now taking a more of an observant role, and
finally taking the initiative to actually figure out what her particular consequences are going to mean later down the road. Something that, of course, it takes time and the concept of hindsight to truly appreciate.
And the same type of 180 is done with what unfortunately winds up being the opposition, is what used to be her friend, Alicent.
Oh, wow. Alicent is definitely a character that took a lot of strength and a lot of willpower to bring to screen.
Like starting off young, she is very submissive on a lot of the decision making taking a forefront, especially in how eventually her lives and Renee and becomes more intertwined than what originally was. And as she grows older, there's such a deep feeling of loss and also time wasted that Alicent feels, that she sees in Rhaenyra, that she's also feels deep content, because the mere fact that even though Rhaenyra starts off that want to be independent, but yet still wants to have her way at it too. Alicent's storyline is that
a character who desperately is who has been placed into this box of having to follow the rules and having to done what her duty was, and truly is regretting and very angry at the fact that she is this one individual doing everything by it was put ahead of her, but having to see others get away with just throwing everything aside.
To say that the show does have their own despicable characters is more of a spoiler, to the point that because we're only covering the first season,
exactly,
and we'll wait until the whole series is done to do a full series review. We don't want to spoil who becomes more of a despicable character,
or where other characters might go. Again, this is a story that centers itself on the Targaryen line and the courting houses that goes with it. Another line which is very important to follow is that the Valyrians, which in this particular adaptation, they are predominantly black.
And it's weird, it's like we have characters, unfortunately, on the Valyrian side that, because of the way the time skips goes, and I don't know how much of the impact of how they were in the book, how much of the role they played. The show is large enough that because we see it on screen, they do have very little to do, at least for this first prologue. The main players being Corlys, who was the head of the household. His wife, Renee.
Who was King Jaehaerys' daughter, who was also named and aptly understood as the queen that never was. Like
I said, Corlys, most of his drive of the series is how he can position his own children to be closer to a throne. And you see that how the tragedy of the Valyrians' house is how ambition becomes too much for them.
Exactly.
To the point that it becomes a domino effect on how you'll see what happens to the Valyrian side.
Yep.
We'll just say that when the Game of Thrones begins, that whole damn empire ceases to exist.
Yeah, I don't think there's any real Valyrians left in that part of the series. If they are, we don't know. They're definitely not there by name, which is something that was also a huge component for Corliss and House Valerian was that whole concept that, history doesn't remember blood, it remembers names. And well, you prove that very much, sir.
Yeah.
But of course, the other part of the series itself, which is just as important as our human characters, we have the dragons.
Yeah, the production of House of the Dragons is a big. You see the big step up from Game of Thrones, man. Because because it's a prequel, and at the start of Game of Thrones, a lot of magic and a lot of the mystical creatures that would have populated that world
were all extinct, were very slim and none that most people didn't even realize most of those things even existed. Well, that is not the case in House of Dragon. These things are very much alive, breathing, and ready to kill anybody who gets in their way.
Yeah, this is their heyday.
Yes.
But here we're talking about mystical creatures. Fortunately enough, dragons are the only mystical side of things that we see in this show.
But they're here, and they're putting their great grandeur and mysticism in themselves. This series, they have different features, they have different personalities. It's very much they did an outstanding job with trying to give more personas and depth
and variety
to these particular creatures.
The whole look of the show is more of a cinematic approach. Although they do have this very haze like filter that it can be distracting because of the mere fact that it sometimes it darkens even the lighter scenes. I suggest if you're going to watch the show, you need to upgrade your TV.
Yeah, do not come here with no late generation production.
High end TV because
you need something that's going to bring in a lot of the depth and color within the series itself.
Yeah.
So I would say mess around, get yourself a Roku, get something.
Get yourself a 4K high definition TV that knows how that lights its blackness well, so it can better contrast from light and dark scenes.
Because be honest with you, this is not going to be the only series that you're probably going to have this issue with. This is going to be something that we're going into the future, ladies and gentlemen. So we got to move on with it.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, it brings a lot more diversity from the director's point of view and writers. For the point that even later half the season, we've seen a lot more female directors taking on forefront, and what they're able to. You see that because there's a lot more of a balancing act in terms of gender.
Yep.
A lot of the storytelling there is a different approach to it that shows a lot more of an intimacy. Even for a lot of the more haunting and more grander moments of the show that really benefits the storytelling.
I would say you could definitely see that front first and center when you deal with the scenes of childbirth or when you have the high intensity, high flying dragon sequences. They are so gripping.
Yes. Music, the composer Ramin Djawadi comes back to do the score for House of the Dragon and doing a very good job like he always does. This time bringing a lot more of there's a lot of variation to the Targaryen theme that we hear from Game of Thrones and different variations. There's much more of a tragicness to it because ultimately
we know where this is going to go. This is not going to be a story for the lighthearted.
So even though this is just the first season of House of the Dragon, we're confident to say that as right now, the first season has been an amazing run. And we hope that the momentum continues when the series ends.
So there we have it. That was our review for House of the Dragon.
Guys, as always, please like, share, and subscribe. If you watch this video, please hit the bell down there at the bottom for notifications. We want to hear from you. Are you a fan of Game of Thrones? Have you watched House of the Dragon? Are you coming back for more? I know I am.
Yes. We'll be reviewing the series once it finishes off. Once probably 3 to 4 seasons at a time. But yeah, please comment below what are your thoughts. Also, be sure to look at our social media outlets of Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for other content that we do not post on this channel.
Because we just don't got the time for everything else.
And yet again, thanks for watching.
See you guys later.